I'm Diane from Millhouse Quilts, and today we're continuing our talk on scrap quilts, and our topic is traditional scrap quilts. Now I find before I start a project, I always think in my mind the color palette that I want to use. And whenever you're thinking of your color palette, a good scrap quilt has something that you think, it's just a little too much. It's a little too bold, the print's a little too big, but it almost always makes it the perfect thing if you throw in that other fabric that you think is just a little bit too much. The quilt I have behind me is Chip Off the Old Block from the Old Green Cupboard. And this is a collection of, we've used navies and creams. So that was our two colors that we picked from. Now we have lots of different shades of cream, beige, and we have mostly dark navy. But in our navy, we have different sizes of prints. We have sort of a big, like a half-inch big flower here, little tiny dots, but it's scattered. So you'll notice with this beige border, we have darker beiges, lighter beiges, but we very consciously put different shades. You can overbalance or over-coordinate a scrap quilt so that it gets boring. It's way more fun if you spice it up a little bit by having a little bit of contrast in your fabrics. We have another one over here that is the traditional log cabin block. And a log cabin block is half light, half dark, and traditionally it always started with a red square in the center, and that was to be like the fireplace was the hearth of the home, the heat, the warmth, the basis of everything. Now, my color palette for this one was no white, no black, heavy on the mid-tones. So all of my lights in here are really mostly darker lights than lighter lights, and my darks are more of the medium range because I didn't want to go totally dark. And I even had the fun of playing with trying to tease the eye and using some of these in-between ones in both the light side and the dark side. And that's the fun with some of these scrap quilts, is if you piece it right, the person looking at the block sees the block that you're making. And you can play around and have, like I say, mix the lights and the darks, but they still read it as light and dark. I also played with it in some of the borders here. You can see the light and the dark. The dark makes this wonderful diamond, but I very purposely took two corners and put them into the outer border. And what I was doing was teasing your eye. You can see the point coming out, and you see it because the fabrics here are different from the fabrics there. These are darker. They're a little more solid print. These have a little bit more brightness in them so that they stand out. I did the same thing up there. A lot of people will look at this quilt and say, oh, you did it wrong. And I said, nope, that's what I was after. So some of the blocks are all light. Here I have green, here I have gold, but you see the light and you see the dark. We have another one over here that was the cover of a book on neutrals, knockout neutrals. I absolutely love this one. The color palette is all beiges and darks, but just the two colors. You need a nice contrast. This is one of my lights, but it's actually a pretty dark light. These are my darks, and they are nice and dark, but I have a lot of different prints, a lot of different colors, and it's just a real traditional 9-patch block. Very, very easy. This one is a collection of woven fabrics, and woven means they haven't printed the design on the front, they've actually woven colored threads together. And the block is just a traditional block. It's 4 triangles, 2 on one side, 2 on the other side. And the fun with this one is playing with the light and the dark, so you can create optics. You can create lines here by how you sew it together. But that's all just one little block, and then you might not have thought of it, but if you frame a single block or a small quilt, if you give this to somebody as a gift, they are going to know how to hang it on the wall right away. You don't have to talk about hang sleeve, you don't have to say anything. Just say, here, I have a nice present for you. Here's another one. This is from Thangles Company. It's the Stash Buster 2014. And when I was looking for fabrics for this one, I thought, purple, teal, and kind of a creamy neutral. So I have about 20 different fabrics, maybe in this one, probably 5 about different neutrals. and then different teals and different purples. And I consciously looked to have some that were darker, some that were brighter. This one is really light. It blends into that, but your eye sees it in the middle here because it's got enough teal and enough purple, and I've put it next to those ones. And then the accent, teal seemed to be the perfect accent here for this inner border before you go to just scrappy blocks on the outer border. Totally fun. This one is a miniature, it's a little trip around the world, and I believe it's about 1 inch square. What I did was go to my stash and I pulled fabrics that blended together, and I was thinking of going from light to dark. My theme here, I've got pink, purple, greens, and then this is the starter fabric, so this is where all those colors are together, and it kind of blends the dark green and the mauve. So this is just one. This is a miniature version, just a little trip around the world. This one is a cross canoes pattern from MH Designs. It's a paper piecing pattern. And when I did this one, I started with my theme fabric here, went to my stash, picked that, and then I looked for ones that went with it, and I wanted the creamy contrast, and then I picked some other greens and this kind of a reddish, a rusty red that actually, it's redder, but it picks up the color in that really well. So I started piecing this one, and all of a sudden, I was running out of my background fabric. This can happen. You don't always know how much you're going to need if you're picking scraps and whatever. So I went back to my stash and I looked to see what else I might have that would still go with these fabrics. And I found this one that actually is a similar shade of green. It's got that, it's kind of a gold, but it has a hint of rust in it, so it went right in. So I used that background in the corners and my creamier one in the middle. And then when I started using my green, I had almost enough of my green. So I have this nice little green print here, and you can't tell unless you can look really close. But in some of these, I've got 2 different greens here. I found this solid green that was the same shade as my little printed green. So it ends up looking planned, looking coordinated. And it started almost planned and coordinated, but this is real typical with the scrap quilt that you don't always know how much you need or how much you have. How much seam allowance you use has a big factor in how quickly you're going to use up the fabric. So, happy quilting, do some traditional piecing, put those fabrics together, think of a color palette before you start. Don't be worried if you run out. Have a plan B, a plan C, a plan D. We've never had to go to Z, and we've always made it work out. Happy quilting from Millhouse Quilts.